We are determined to act. The tab in Cammy's pocket blared as she ran out into the field next to her grandparents' house. The soles of her shoes, too thin to do much more than keep the dirt off her feet, thudded against the ground as she pushed through the broken cornstalks. The dry leaves still clinging to the stalks rattled like snakes as she brushed up against them, but not so loud that Cammy couldn't hear the broadcast. And our actions are integral to the future of all humankind, the person speaking went on. We will not allow our species to be consumed in the uprising, nor will we allow ourselves to be anything other than the sovereign guardians of our own potential. The mission of the Voidbreaker Karis is nothing less weighty than the hope of an entire species, and we will prove ourselves worthy of supporting that heavy responsibility. I ask that you keep us in your minds and hearts, as we surely will remember and reflect on all of the loved ones we leave behind. Even in the middle of her snit, Cammy had to roll her eyes. The captain of the Voidbreaker Karis was such a fucking blowhard. Had to make a production out of everything, from brewing coffee to launching a colony ship into space. Don't talk that way about your mother, Grandma had chided her a few minutes ago when the broadcast began. For all that Cammy's mother, Victorine, had cut ties with her own parents years ago, citing their willingness to work alongside the Carnine Confederation as a betrayal of humanity, Cammy's grandparents were very proud of everything their daughter had accomplished. Yes, so proud. She ran away from you, and now she's running away from me. Such a great person. Fueled by bitterness, Cammy ignored the scratching slap of the broken stalks against her arms and face as she kept running. She would run as long as she wanted to, get messy and dirty and no one would care. Mum wasn't here to tell her to straighten herself up and act her age, and that was fine. Cammy didn't care. She didn't want her mum's approval, or her dad's quiet resignation, or... Her pocket buzzed. Panting for breath, Cammy came to a stop and pulled out the tab. Tabs were the cheapest communication devices available, way less fancy than the bio-integrated stuff Cammy had grown up with, but it was all her grandparents could afford. The whole thing broke down to a unit no larger than half her palm, but it still felt bulky, and the holoscreen function didn't even work in direct sunlight. Trash. Just like my life. But at least she had a message from Delia to brighten her day. Delia was Cammy's twin, turning 13 in 4 weeks just like her. They were Victorine and Liam Mitchell's only children, and like all human first followers, they'd been brought up in a closed compound that was 100% human, raised on a diet of pro-human propaganda and the hope of the Great Push, the continuing settlement efforts on Mars. An all-human colony on Mars was the ultimate goal, not only to prove that humans remained the best, despite the incursions of uplifts, but to give all of humanity a fresh start on a new planet. Yes, it would be hard. It was hard. So many had died already in the effort to get there, but it would be worth it. The preservation of humankind is worth any pain along the journey. Victorine had insisted over and over again. Her staunch spirit and technical prowess led to her being named captain of the latest generation of efforts to colonize Mars, with her husband Liam along as the chief engineer, and their daughter standing tall beside them as their hope for the future. A future on Mars. Until Cammy was deemed unworthy of having a future. The faintest murmur in her heart, totally fixable, but not in the time for her to make the original launch date. And the launch couldn't be delayed. We can't put the needs of one person ahead of the needs of 1,000 others, her mother had said, and wow, that conversation had only gone downhill from there. Wiping her sweaty forehead and grimacing when she pulled a yellowing piece of corn silk off it, Cammy sat down in the clearest space she could find within a dozen feet and checked her message box. There was the new visual note from her sister, the latest in a long string of messages they'd exchanged ever since Cammy was sent to live with their grandparents. 2 days to pack and say her goodbyes, and then poof, banish and vanish while the 1,000 people who actually made the cut began their 3-month quarantine to make sure all the viruses and bugs were out of their systems before takeoff. Cammy pulled up the video and saw Delia sitting in her EV suit, helmet off, rubbing her red nose. It stinks up here, Delia said. I know space is supposed to be smelly, but I didn't expect it to smell this bad. It's like sitting inside a barbecue. Cammy rolled her eyes, so much for their dad's vaunted exponential improvements to PSH technology in preparation for the voyage, girls. Don't you worry. Yeah, don't worry about the only thing keeping the vacuum of space from turning the ship inside out. Is shitty PSH tech. Not that Cammy was going to bring that up again now that Delia was actually in space. They bitched about it plenty to each other already, but now that the ship was underway, talking about it felt wrong. Like she might jinx it if she says something bad and screw her parents, but Cammy would never wish ill on her sister. Anyway, Delia rubbed her nose again. Mum's going to be busy for a while, I guess. I mean, more than usual. Lots of space junk to get around in close orbit. Stupid satellites. Stupid satellites, her sister said, a perfect mental echo. Cammy smiled despite herself. Losing Delia felt like losing half her limbs, but she and her sister were still in tune. Delia stared straight into the camera. This is the last video call I'll get to make for a while. We're supposed to be saving power for emergencies, after all. Never mind that most of the ship runs on solar now that we're underway. It's so... whatever. She tugged on the end of a lock of hair, her once long auburn ponytail cut short so that it would all fit under the EV helmet. Cammy's hair was still long, extending halfway down her back and probably full of bits and pieces of plant matter right now. I miss you. I know you know that already. I know you miss me back, but it didn't feel so real until now, you know, that we're never going to see each other again. Delia wiped the tear falling down her cheek, and hundreds of thousands of miles away, Cammy wiped her cheeks too. I wish they'd let me stay with you. Emergency! The warning system on the ship suddenly blared, turning the light in Delia's cabin from bright white to dark red. Emergency! All central system power must be temporarily rerouted. Stop whatever you are doing and assume your environmental suits for the next 5.2 minutes. Again, stop. Stupid junky piece of... The video ended. Cammy was left staring at a blank screen, desperate to know whether or not the Voidbreaker Caris had broken to pieces less than an hour after breaking atmosphere. She checked the news notifications and it looked like it was okay, having a minor technical issue of some kind. Which, duh, the entire ship was one technical issue after another. Cammy, who'd been 7 when construction began on it, and listened to her dad curse his way through every phase of the project, was still kind of stunned it had been deemed spaceworthy. It had to be, though. Council's got to get their money back on the investment, proof that they're on the right track. Cammy kind of hated that she knew enough about politics to know that. Stupid Human Continuity Council, stupid Mars that made living on it so hard, stupid parents for leaving her here, and stupid uplifts for making them feel they had to and... Hello? Cammy startled so bad she almost fell over, twisting in place to look toward the voice coming out of the corn. It took a few moments to pick up the golden eyes located among the pale stalks, and longer to see the rest of the person beyond it. It was a canine, but a young one. What were they called? Kids? Pups? He sounded young, at least. Who knew what passed for an adult among canines? Grandma and Grandpa know. But Cammy didn't want to talk to them because then they want to talk, and she definitely didn't want to talk to this... Were you spying on me? She asked, in as nasty a tone as she could muster while getting to her feet. That's so fucking rude. I wasn't spying, the pup said indignantly. I was just curious. I didn't think anyone else ever came out here, but then I smelled your scent and... You smell me? That's gross. It's not gross. It's natural. Smelling is our strongest sense. Yeah? Well, it's still gross. Nuh-uh, the pup muttered. Yeah? Nuh-uh. And Cammy laughed. She didn't mean to. She didn't want to, but their conversation was so stupid and so normal that it felt like one she could be having with Delia, or another of their friends, only all of their friends were on the Voidbreaker too. Cammy was the only one left behind. Tears welled up again in her eyes, and she dashed them away as she got to her feet. There was no way she was going to cry in front of an uplift. Humans didn't let their enemies see their tears. She started to march off in the direction she was sure she'd come from, but... Granville's the other way. West. Shut up, Cammy snapped, but she did turn around. She was back at her grandparents' house in 5 minutes, the rest of town looming like a mushroom cloud in the distance. I hate this place, she said, and it felt true. The corn rustled behind her, but when Cammy turned around she didn't see anyone there. Cammy stared, unblinking, at her mother's note in response to her latest test scores. I expect better than this from you. How are you going to succeed in life if you fail a subject as simple as calculus? Your sister is acing all her classes. Just because you're still on Earth doesn't mean you're not a representative of this family. Your father and I are incredibly disappointed and... Let me see that for a second, baby. Grandpa's big hand reached out and carefully took her tab. It's from your mama, right? She nodded, the lump in her throat too big to speak around. Mind if I take a look? She shook her head, but didn't watch, as her grandfather read the note. He'd been the one that chided her last week when her scores came in, tell her she needed to do better if she still wanted to get to Mars someday. And now he'd see that her mother agreed with him and... Oh, Cammy girl. Grandpa's hand was back, his thumb brushing at the wetness on her cheek. I'm sorry, but you know your mother doesn't mean to be so. Cammy snapped. Yes, she does. She pushed back from the kitchen table and headed for the door. She always does this. Always. She left before she had to listen to another defense of the captain. 2 weeks gone, and the first note her mother had bothered to leave for her at all was a critique of her grades. No, I love you. No, I miss you. Just, you're an awful child, and we clearly picked the best one to come with us. Not that Delia ever implied that. She wouldn't. Cammy wished she'd saved her sister's note to read last instead of her mum's. It was funny, talking about all the plans for Karasra, the settlement the Voidbreaker colonists were going to live in. The blueprints have emergency exits. Emergency exits! From the habitat bubble. Like, great, yeah, let's evacuate into the part that's trying to kill us. So smart, right? Cammy walked down the dusty, unpaved road until she got as far as the first intersection, before realizing she had nowhere to go. She had no friends' houses to take refuge at. There was no public library in a town this small, and the park was probably full of uplifts who would smell her and know everything about her and... no. Just no. She ended up walking to the school. It was so retro living in a place that had an actual schoolhouse, so different from learning everything from the comfort of your own home. Uplifts, and canines in particular, seemed to think it was important for people to get together for the sake of building community. Learning in person was kind of nice, actually, or it would have been if Delia had been here with her. But Cammy felt alone, even in a classroom full of other humans and canines. She sat down on the fully rotational swing in the playground, buckled herself in and pushed off. The counterweight detected her mass and automatically adjusted to send her spinning all the way around the central axis. Cammy kicked it twice to throw in an extra loop on every second rotation, then added a flip just for the heck of it. She spun and spun, and it was almost like being back in centrifuge training at home, back when she was going on the Voidbreaker Karis 2. Wow! What the... Cammy looked, until she spotted a familiar blonde canine by the base of the swing. The pup was looking up at her with wide eyes, front paws clenched in the fabric of their tunic. What are you doing here? She called out. I smelled you. Ew. Why are you smelling for me, freak? The pup shrugged. I can't help it. You're a new scent and it's harder to ignore those. Mum said more exposure would help me get over it. I'm your exposure therapy? Cammy said flatly, as the swing arced to bring her onto the pup's level for a moment before shooting her back into the sky. Nice. I feel loved. Mum said I should get to know you because you don't have any friends. Your mum is a bitch. Literally. Not that Cammy would say that. She might talk filth, but not about someone's mum. The only people who got away with filth-talking mums were their own kids, hers included. I don't need friends, she said, on her next rotation down. You smell like you do. Cammy scoffed. What does that even smell like? Like loneliness. Oh. Oh. As the grey sky spun out overhead, Cammy felt caught between screaming in anger and breaking down into tears. Again, ugh. She was such a cliché these days. Poor, lonely human girl left behind by her family while they all went off to have fun without her. Screw that. She kicked the bar beneath her feet twice, and the swing began to slow down. A few seconds later she was level with the ground again, and the pup was looking at her with what might be the start of a canine smile. What's your name? Cammy asked, as she unbuckled herself. Dawnsky, what's yours? Cammy. She held out her hand, then bit back a smile as Dawnsky politely sniffed it, then offered his in exchange. She made a show of sniffing and felt a surge of satisfaction roll through her at the thought of her parents seeing her now. Yeah, I'm greeting an uplift in a culturally correct manner. Suck it, Mum. Do you like kiwis? Dawnsky asked. My mother got some sent to her from a friend in Kalorin. They're primates, and they're in charge of an entire greenhouse that supplies part of one of the major Cocoa Valley cities. Sometimes she has more than they can use, so we get some of the extra. Cammy had never had kiwis before. I don't know if I like them or not. Come try. That was how Cammy ended up spending an entire evening with an Uplift family for the first time, eating kiwis, which were delicious, and accepting slightly burnt chicken instead of the raw meat that everyone else in Dawnsky's family was eating, then going home as the sun set, feeling a lot less hollow than before. No one was in the kitchen when she got back, but when she picked up her tab, it opened on a note from her grandfather to her mother, sent in her account. If you can't get your head out of your ass long enough to remember to tell your daughter you love her, then don't bother writing at all. Is it weird living with them? Cammy paused as she read the message from her sister. Her parents had arranged for them to have a live, permanent communicator connection while Delia was in space. Text only. But still, it was the best birthday present she could have asked for. They probably wouldn't be able to talk like this a lot once Carisra was habitable. With uplifts, her sister continued a moment later. Not too weird, Cammy wrote back after a bit of consideration. I mean, yes, but most of the ones in school are just kids. They whisper behind the teacher's back and play tag at recess and put off doing their homework. Normal stuff. At least, Dawnsky did those things, but Dawnsky was 3 years younger than Cammy, so it was expected he'd be kind of immature. His parents had told Cammy more than once they thought she was a good influence on their youngest. She tried not to preen too obviously at the compliment. Do you miss living in New Haven? I miss you, Cammy said instantly. I'd do anything to be with you, but no. I don't really miss living in the city. It felt strange to put that down in words, almost like a betrayal. She hoped Delia didn't see it that way. I don't miss it either, Delia wrote. Probably because almost everyone we know is on this stupid ship. But I do miss being on solid ground. I miss air that doesn't stink, and grass and trees and flowers, and I miss water that doesn't taste like metal. And I miss feeling warm, and I miss getting through a night without waking up 5 times thanks to alarms going off because something is breaking. And I miss Dad's hugs and Mum smelling like coffee, and I miss hearing you laugh. No one laughs on this ship, and I hate it here. I hate it, I hate it. I hate it so much. Cammy's heart hurt so bad, she knew it had to be breaking, as she read through her sister's breakdown. I'm sorry, she wrote as fast as she could. I'm so sorry. I miss you too. I wish I was with you. I wish we could be together. Maybe they could be someday. Maybe after her heart surgery next month, she'd eventually be able to travel to Carisra and reunite with Delia once things were more stable there. Or maybe something would happen, and the Voidbreaker would turn around and come back home instead of risking a landing. That was dangerous thinking, but it wasn't impossible. I love you. And there was nothing to say to that except, I love you too. It was docking day. Cammy and her grandparents huddled around the house's embedded media screen, tuned in to the special frequency that was only for family members of the colonists and, of course, the Human Continuity Council. They were hosting the broadcast, and listening to the council spokesperson regale everyone with the same list of talking points over and over again as the ship neared orbit was getting irritating. Did you know that these colonists are the finest examples of humanity ever produced? Cammy asked in a bored tone. And did you know that each and every one of them is dedicated to the bright and brilliant future of the human race? I hear they're paragons of education and upbringing too, Grandpa said, as he sipped at a mug of tea. That would be my doing, Grandma said tartly, and they all laughed even though it wasn't really funny. Anything to break the tension that wound itself tighter and tighter around Cammy's heart as the ship approached the space dock. The Voidbreaker Caris was too fragile to actually land on Mars, so the intermediate step was for it to dock at the rather decrepit orbital space station above the planet. Once there, they would begin the process of disassembling the ship and launching critical components for the construction of Karisra down to the surface. Shielded from heat and radiation by the panels that had protected the colonists on their 6-week journey, they would land with the help of parachutes that would act as windbreaks once they hit the ground. They had specialized robots along to build the first few habitat spheres, and once those were up and running, the skeleton of the Voidbreaker would act as protection for the colonists themselves as they finally made their descent to the surface. It had taken a lot of deadly trial and error to figure out this system. Landing their ships directly on the surface of the planet had led to catastrophic failure in 9 out of the first 10 colonization attempts. The impact simply couldn't be managed well enough to keep the ship itself secure when it was carrying so much weight, hence the space dock. Breaking things down like this had worked the past 2 times, for a given value of worked, since only one of those colonies was still standing. But this would work. It would. It had to. This was the last step of the first part of the journey of the Voidbreaker Karis, and it would be a wild success. Everyone said so. Cammy's tab buzzed faintly. She carefully took it out of her pocket and unfolded it enough to see her sister's message. Mum is freaking out. Why? Unexpected meteorite activity between us and the dock. Oh shit. Cammy eased herself back from the media station until she was out of the line of sight of her grandparents. She didn't see it coming? They're too tiny to show up on long-distance radar, I guess. Okay, tiny was good, wasn't it? The pressure seals can handle tiny. You had 2 impacts in orbit above Earth, and you were okay, right? Yeah, but Dad used all the sealant he had on these impacts. He was supposed to synthesize more, but they weren't able to get the gel tanks running right. It grew wrong every time. He was going to get it fixed while we were in hurry up and wait mode here on the station. But he didn't. Of course he didn't. Don't dock yet, then. That's what Mum told the council, but they said she has to dock the ship today. Otherwise, it's a blow to morale or some bullshit. 3 minutes from space dock, the media station announced. The Voidbreaker Karis is 3 minutes out from Mars Station 1. Mum is the captain, Cammy wrote as fast as she could. They can't tell her what to do all the way from Earth. It's never stopped them before, but I think it'll be okay. Mum wouldn't actually try to dock unless she knew it was safe. Cammy thought about her mother for a moment. Tall and elegant, but severe, dedicated to the cause before all, and willing to cut off anyone who stood in her way, whether it was her parents or her daughter. She valued the council's good opinion over, well, everything. But Victorine loved Delia, and she loved their dad, and there were over 300 more children on the ship. Delia was right. Mum wouldn't risk it. Of course not. You're going to be fine. 2 minutes from space dock. I know. Yeah. Cammy stared at her tab, but nothing was coming through. Delia? Nothing. Cammy tried not to panic as she waited for a response. It didn't come soon enough. Delia? 1 minute to space dock. Captain Mitchell is moving with great care. Soon we'll have acknowledgement of a secure habitat seal. Delia! Cammy stared at the screen and finally breathed again as words began to appear. They stopped. There's been a disruption in the transmission. Please stand by. A disruption? What the hell did that mean? Cammy looked over at her grandparents, who were staring at the black screen and holding each other's hands so tightly their fingers had blanched. Please stand by while we wait for confirmation of successful docking at Mars Station 1. Cammy stared down at her tab, waiting for Delia to start writing again. The meteorites must have taken out part of the communication satellite, or maybe it was even bad enough they were on emergency oxygen. But that was alright. The crew had practiced their safety procedures every day. They knew what to do. Her family was alright. They had to be. Please stand. A new voice interrupted the announcer. Cammy recognized it as Michael Drexler, the head of the Human Continuity Council. We're working on re-engaging with the Voidbreaker Karis and will reach out with updates once we have the full picture. For now, we suggest you keep our brave colonists in mind as you go about your duties. Humanity first. Then there was nothing coming through the media unit but white noise. What does that mean? Grandma asked, turning to Grandpa with a look of dismay. Why do they need to re-engage? We had a clear transmission just a minute ago. Cammy knew why. Later it would come out that in the moment of docking between the Voidbreaker Carris and the station, the precious seal habitat technology that had been so sorely tested on the trip to Mars gave out completely due to an inopportune meteorite strike. The rapid damage created a cascading failure throughout multiple control systems, and the partitions that were meant to separate off the damaged parts of the ship from the whole ones didn't trigger. Vacuum ripped through the colony ship, tearing apart the fragile interior, and in less than 30 seconds the entire ship had been fatally exposed to space. Later, Cammy would wonder about whether or not people survived the initial expulsion. She knew that they were all supposed to wear their EV suits in case of an accident. When they were sucked into the black, hurtling away from the remnants of their sanctuary surrounded by pieces of the Voidbreaker, did they scream? Or was the shock too great? Did they hope against hope that they'd be rescued? Did Delia float alone for hours? Or days? Those were thoughts for later. Right now, all Cammy knew with certainty, absolute certainty, was that something had gone terribly wrong. Delia would never make her wait for a response, not when she knew Cammy was so worried. Even though she didn't have the details, Cammy was sure now that she would never hear from her family again. She left her grandparents arguing about it, padded quietly to the kitchen door and down the stairs. The cornfield had deteriorated even more in the past 6 weeks, only half the stalks still upright, ground littered with pale, dusty leaves. Cammy walked to the edge of the field, her tab clenched in her hand, and looked at it. Nothing. She broke and started to run. She ran so hard she began to pant, her legs aching, lungs burning as her faltering heart tried to leap right through her chest. She ran until the burn became a blaze, and her legs went from lead to rubber, as all she could do was fall, skidding on crop detritus, and landed on her side. Cammy curled up, tears streaming from her face, as her horror fought for control of her ragged throat, pressing her to scream, scream, scream. Dawnsky found her before she could get the breath for it. The pup crawled over to her, sniffing the air with a whine. "You smell sad," Dawnsky whispered, close enough to reach now, and Cammy leaned into the canine's embrace and sobbed. The howl that went up a moment later was heartbreaking enough to be almost like the right sound for the worst thing ever.